Indus Kashmir Special. I am Zunaira Azhar.
And I'm Ahmed Qureshi.
Today we are honored to be part of this special broadcast jointly commenced by Indus News and PTV World. As we embark upon 2 years of the sudden and disgraceful abrogation of Article 370 in the Indian-occupied Kashmir, the irony is that situation remains unchanged. The date is also important and significant because not only that autonomous status of Jammu and Kashmir was ripped off, but also India continues even today to act as an irresponsible state towards the peace within the region and outside it.
Exactly, and that's a key point, Zunaira. And in doing so, the government of India actually pushed the Indian people, pushed Pakistan, and pushed Kashmiris into a dead end, and created a situation where the conflict could expand instead of reducing. So today, on Kashmir, India stands isolated on the world stage and is the subject of countless critical reporting by the international media, by experts, and even by government officials who are concerned by human rights violations by the Indian Army in Kashmir. And now, Zunaira, in just 24 months, for example, the UN Security Council held 2 meetings on Kashmir for the first time in 50 years. We've had the US Congress hold 2 extensive hearings on Indian actions in Kashmir. We've had the British Parliament organize a special hearing on the situation in the occupied region. And finally, we've had 16 members of the European Parliament raise the question of what's happening inside Indian-occupied Kashmir. So you have all of these very, very important developments that prove that India's actions and the robbing of Kashmiris' political rights and their human rights is really resonating internationally.
It is. And the most important part?
Yeah, and the most important part is that no country in the world recognizes what India has done 2 years ago. Unlawfully.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the case for Kashmir has never been a simpler one. It is a continuation of alarming human rights and humanitarian crisis that even doesn't stop with the pandemic. And it's really surprising. While the whole world is trying to help each other, Kashmiris have no access to public health, no health care, free speech, education for that matter, right to move freely, and the list goes on. So we have put together a great show today for you in solidarity with Kashmiri people, and in doing so we want you to stay with us as we raise our voices and concern for peace and stability for Kashmiri people.
So, Zunaira, I think we should get to the discussion right now.
Yeah,
and we should
right
not
away.
delay it. And I'm very honored to have a very distinguished panel with us right now. And I look forward to this discussion. And we have so many questions, really, we've gone through. So I begin with introducing the guest here in the studio with me. And it's Lord Qurban Hussain, who's very well known, actually, but let me just introduce him again. He's a British Pakistani member of the House of Lords, a very well-known politician, and thank you very much, Lord Saab, for being here.
Thank you for being
and
here.
I'm also very, very honored to have with me former Foreign Secretary of Pakistan, Ambassador Riaz Khokhar Saab, a very distinguished name in Pakistani diplomacy. And another very distinguished name in Pakistani diplomacy is former Ambassador Asif Durrani Saab. Very honored, Ambassador Saab, and good to see you. And also very, very happy to see Mr. Peter Allen Oborne joining us, British journalist and broadcaster and author of 2 very interesting books. One is the latest book, actually, Zunaira. It's The Assault on Truth. I look forward to Googling this book because I just came to know about this book, Mr. Oborne. And then you have
the second one is even more interesting.
Yeah.
History of Pakistan's cricket.
Yes. So very honored to have this very distinguished panel with us. And let me begin with the guest in the studio, Lord Qurban. If I were to ask you very briefly, one of the things that I was going through on this occasion, the 2nd anniversary of India's illegal actions on Kashmir, is the fact that India in these 2 years has done a lot really to normalize whatever it did in Kashmir, to normalize it. They have not only failed in that, but this is my question to you. Have they also failed in securing recognition for the illegal annexation of Kashmir? Have they really failed in getting endorsement from any country in the world for what they did in Kashmir? Is that true?
Well, let me say first of all that, of course, India is trying its best to get its actions endorsed by the international community. They tried with guided tours from some members of the European Parliament, and who they were able to get. There were only a bunch of right-wing politicians from the European Union. And even they had a guided tour, and they were not able to speak to anybody in the ground.
Not that we have anything against the right-wingers.
No. But I mean, we know that Mr. Modi himself is a right-winger, and
so
he can only get people of his own thinking together, and not the wider community. And at the same time, I have to say that the British politicians, some of us, have been trying very hard to go there and see for ourselves. The All-Party Parliamentary Group on Kashmir, for whom I'm the secretary, we have written to the Indian embassy in London many times asking for access to visit Kashmir. And they have never bothered to even respond. They know that if we were together, we would like to see a lot more on the ground and meet people and so forth. So India is miserably failed. It has miserably failed in actually getting any verification, any endorsement from any government as such. The claims that it made for those actions, they are going to bring prosperity and development and democracy and all the rest of it. Well, none of them has surfaced as such. In fact, what has the people seen is more of oppression, the curfews, the cordon and search operations, killings, torture.
And the list
still
is
goes
endless.
on. Yes, that's right. And there's no relief whatsoever with these actions of 5th of August 2019. If anything, things have gone back to worse.
The same point. Ambassador Khokhar, as you've heard what Mr. Qurban had to say, and he's utterly right that they have been miserably failed to endorse or garner any support from the international community. And I have in front of me a letter that has been written to the President of European Commission by some very esteemed members of the European Parliament. But do you think there has been enough hue and cry and enough support for Kashmiris and the international stage?
Well, first of all, I'd like to pay tribute to the people of Jammu and Kashmir for their struggle, the way they have suffered, and the way they have made sacrifices. India is a very Indian politicians, bureaucracy, they're very arrogant people. They don't care a damn what the international community thinks. And they don't care, but the fact is, not very many voices have spoken for Pakistan or for the Kashmiris. The international community has no conscience. That's the sad part of it. That is the cold-blooded realpolitik. How many major capitals in the world have condemned the Indian action? I'm not so sure. I don't think the US Blinken, Secretary of State Blinken was recently in India. He didn't say a word about Kashmir.
Yeah, even George Lloyd.
So similarly, the other capitals also, I'm afraid there's, sadly, there is very little left in the conscience of the international community. And for 70 years, more than 70 years, not only the people of Jammu and Kashmir have suffered, and so have the Palestinians. And so where is the international conscience there? And with all due respects to the...
To the right.
Yeah, he's right. And I think the same question you should ask from Ambassador Durrani. Because
Actually, the assessment that Ambassador Khokhar just gave is the reality.
Yeah.
And I would like to just take the flip side of it. The flip side being, on the one hand, we don't see, as Ambassador Khokhar rightly said, we don't see a very robust vocal condemnation of what India did, for example. But this is my question also to Ambassador Durrani, just to follow up on what Ambassador Khokhar said. Ambassador Durrani, the flip side I would like to raise, which is, on the other hand, I have noticed, and lots of people have noticed, in the past 2 years, and maybe even more, maybe 3 or 4 years, I've seen a shift in the approach of the international media on the human rights situation, both in Indian-occupied Kashmir and also inside India. So, for example, I see a shift in the language that the international media now, and even some of the important and major think tanks and experts are using when they speak and talk about Indian Army's role in Indian-occupied Kashmir, and also about the situation of minorities in India. So my question to you, Ambassador Durrani, is, do you also see this shift? It might be subtle. I would dare say it's not subtle. It's very obvious. There's a shift. How do you see that shift? How important it is, and where it can take us in terms of changing perceptions, global perceptions on Kashmir?
I think Ambassador Riaz Khokhar has, said it all. What I also wanted to say, India does not care much what action they have taken. Had they been so careful, they would have taken into account the international community's reaction to whatever action they have taken after revoking Article 370 in the occupied Kashmir. But, and then I think somehow the fate also sided with the Indians, that on 5th August 2019, they take the action. They have the worst kind of lockdown in the whole Jammu and Kashmir, occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And then in March 2000 comes the Corona. And they justified their, lockdown in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. They could kill the people with impunity. Before this action of Article 370 revocation, they had killed almost 1,100 children through pellet guns. And the whole world community did not take notice. So it was after the revocation of Article 370, we did see something in media. But here, media may say whatever they want to say. But whatever, it has not made the public opinion charge in the Western world. That is the problem. And the reason is that India has got the buying power. They have got the economic muscle. If they have $50 billion trade with the United States as compared to yours of $7 billion, just don't compare it. And then if they have $120 billion trade with Saudi Arabia and UAE as against yours $9 billion, then there's no comparison. And who is going to listen to whom? I think it is quite obvious. So I think we should not pin any hopes as far as the shift in the international media's attitude towards occupied Jammu and Kashmir is concerned. There's none. There has been some tits and bits, but what you see in the international media, they, for instance, on Palestine, they don't say much, and for Jammu and Kashmir, occupied Jammu and Kashmir, they would not say much because India is in league with them. Yes.
Right. Peter, are you listening to all this discussion?
I'm listening with deep fascination and great agreement.
So splendid.
Yeah.
I would like to ask what is your take on this? That I have in front of me an example of a woman, Masrat Zahra, who is a photojournalist. She has been accused of anti-state propaganda, anti-national activities, and we all know that whether it is about the tiniest of the news, or it is about Afghanistan, or it is about abduction of a woman, when it comes to Pakistan, we see so much hue and cry on the international media. When it comes to uranium selling in India, or the kind of stuff India is doing in Kashmir, there is just a lip service. How do you think international media should behave, or do you think they are behaving the way they should be?
If I could answer as a political journalist specializing in Britain, but also knowing Pakistan well and covering the Middle East, I've been very surprised by the reaction of the British government. There's been no, just to echo what former Foreign Secretary Khokhar said, There has been no condemnation from the British government. There has, when the move was made, Dominic Asquith, I want to name him because I think he behaved very poorly as the British ambassador in India. We should have condemned very strongly the actions of the Indian government. You have to remember that the Indian government is an Islamophobic government waging war on Muslims in India. It's a very grave and terrible situation. And then we had the seizing control of Kashmir and the renunciation of the partial autonomy. And the feeble reaction of the British government was very shocking, particularly since our very inexperienced Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, is constantly making rather shrill statements about how much he cares about, Britain cares about journalists and the protection of journalists, and also making great statements about human rights. But they avert their eyes from Kashmir. And you've got to ask why, and then I would echo the words of Asif Durrani. The reason for this is that they want to grovel, I think that's the best word, grovel to Narendra Modi. We in Britain are suffering the consequences of this because Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, was eager to make a trade visit to India. Yeah. And he didn't stop flights from India at a time when what is now known as the Delta the Delta virus was flooding into Britain. Now, and so you do have a situation where Britain is scared for trade reasons, as former Ambassador Durrani said, to take on Modi, and this makes us look hypocritical. I do have some hopes. There's a large Muslim community in Britain who are appalled by the actions of the British government or the inaction. And quite a lot of them, oddly enough, are in Tory seats following the last election. And there is a small group of conservative MPs from the ruling Conservative Party who are now quite outspoken about this and challenging the British government's view that this is a bilateral matter between India and Pakistan. It's not a bilateral matter between India and Pakistan.
Is it a bilateral matter?
It's an international matter. And it's a question
Mr.
of
Oborne,
honoring
if I could just interrupt here, Mr. Oborne, and if I could just ask something a question that is inspired by what you said moments ago. If I were to ask you a very direct question about the fact that India does have very good ability to flex its economic muscle. It has great trade ties with China. It has great trade ties with Russia, with Iran, with Turkey, with Middle Eastern Gulf states and others. But despite all of that, in these 2 years, Indian diplomacy and diplomats were unable to extract clear, direct recognition from all of these trading partners for its annexation of Kashmir on 5 August 2019. The failure of Indian diplomacy to extract a clear worded recognition of its annexation of Kashmir. How do you see that?
Yes, I think that is positive, but it's what the status quo is the problem. That we know it is regarded as a bilateral matter. It's particularly true of Britain because, as you know very well, this is a legacy of the British Empire. It's
like they are the architect, I would say, of this problem.
And the decision to allow Hari Singh to declare Jammu Kashmir as a Hindu nation against the will of the Hindu country, against the will of the largely Muslim population, was allowed by Mountbatten, the last viceroy. And so we do have a very serious moral responsibility to the people of Kashmir. And I do not see and although we haven't actually recognized the illegal partial annexation of Kashmir. What we haven't done in Britain, and this of course applies to the much of the wider international community, is to condemn the actions of the Indian government.
Okay, even if that happens, even if the actions taken by the brute force of India are condemned at international level, that is not enough, Lord Qurban. To me, it's not enough. Like, we have a viable model of East Timor. When it has to happen, it happens.
And just to add, Lord Qurban, to what Zunaira is saying, I think the challenge is how to translate whatever small shifts that we've seen in the media in terms of coverage of what's happening inside Indian-occupied Kashmir, how to translate all that concern for human rights into political action. How to do that? I mean, that's a huge challenge for everybody, and especially for us.
I think what is happening, and it is not only limited to Britain. I think the international community, the UN, the permanent members of the UN, they have failed Kashmiris miserably because they have double standards when it comes to East Timor and South Sudan and so forth. The UN was quick to implement their resolutions. Okay, it is under a different section of UN resolutions, but nevertheless, Kashmir also has UN resolutions, and they have been put on the back burner. And it is not only Britain. And I think the last speaker was absolutely right to say that the present government is not taking these issues seriously, and they're continuously. I mean, I am one of those who keep raising these issues again and again in other Lords, and I keep hitting, the block wall is there. Minister saying that, well, it's an issue, bilateral issue between India and Pakistan.
Yeah.
We keep reminding them that it's not an international issue.
It is not.
It is not a bilateral issue. It is internationally recognized dispute, and it has UN resolutions. There are India-Pakistan summits and their resolutions which keep referring back to the right of self-determination, and the people of Kashmir need to find a solution to it. I mean, I asked a last question on the last session of the Parliament last Thursday that we broke off, and my question was on human rights in India and particularly on Kashmir. And again, although the minister was quick to say that, the question was, and this is where I think the last speaker was right to say that, I asked the government, Britain every year issues a list of countries where there are concerns for human rights. And it mentions many other countries except India.
Wow. That's huge.
That's huge.
I mean, that's huge. Ambassador
And I asked them, and I said, well, perhaps, just because the country is not on the list doesn't mean that, we are not concerned about it. But I said, your actions don't meet your words, because that is exactly what you do.
That's why Peter said it's hypocritical.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Ambassador Khokhar, you're part of the whole discussion. So we see consumerism, or we see economics taking precedence over human rights. Is that what is happening into this world? But as I mentioned, East Timor, and for that matter, South Sudan, as Lord Qurban said, where there is will, there is a way. Like, we have seen the international community acting very vigilantly. So is this Islamophobic kind of a denial? Is this Islamic country-specific thing, or is it geopolitical specific thing? Why are they ignoring this conflict constantly?
Well, just for the record, East Timor and South Sudan, basically Christian communities were involved. And that's why the interest of the international community to get them their referendum or plebiscite and their freedom. Yes, trade, commerce, are very, very critical factors in international relations, particularly in bilateral relations. And clearly, most Western countries have their priorities, and the priority is to have very strong economic links with India. India is a very big country. Don't forget, it's 1.2 or 3 billion people. It's a very big market, very attractive market. When you look at the map of South Asia, what do you see? You see India. And then you see these countries girdling South Asia.
India, yeah.
So the point is that even China, our very good friend, China has been trading and doing economic business with India. It's over 100 billion now. So you take Saudi Arabia, you take UAE, they have very, very strong vested interests. And similarly, India also has very strong vested interests in these big countries. If you were to look at just the capital that has gone to Britain from Pakistan, on which Prime Minister Imran Khan very often emphasizes, it's a huge, huge figure. Similarly, India has huge economic interests in UK, in UAE, in Saudi Arabia. And please don't forget, their communities are very well organized. This is the difference between them and us. Our communities are like the politics in Pakistan.
Very divided. Ambassador Khokhar, I just want to shift your attention to another point, which has to do with Pakistani diplomacy. Despite all the challenges that Pakistani diplomacy faces in terms of countering the influence of India and its market and so forth, but I see, as a very humble student of diplomacy and politics, I also see that, and you played, like Ambassador Durrani, you played quite a role in this actually. Pakistani diplomacy, despite all these challenges, did actually put up a very, I would say, impressive resistance to India's attempts to let the world completely ignore and forget Kashmir. India has, although been able to probably succeeded in maybe averting any international action on Kashmir so far, but Pakistani diplomacy did actually make things difficult for India on a number of levels. I would like to hear your take on this.
Well, Pakistani diplomats will do what the government asks them to do. We follow policy, and I can tell you, I'm a former foreign secretary. I may have retired a long time ago, but we are a very small diplomatic corps. We are no more than 500 people. I may be wrong about the figure even now. Maybe it's less than 500. And most of our embassies are very, very small, and we have very limited resources. But despite all that, you can see that at the United Nations we are very active. You can see in Geneva we are very active in the Human Rights Council and the Commission. We are active in various parts of the world. But there is only shall we say, a limit to what we can do. The important thing, Ahmed, is to remember that foreign policy is the other side of the coin of the domestic scene in the country. So sometimes we get just making hot air speeches is not good enough. We have to do much more than that. We have to first put our house in order. We have to get what you call a national consensus on some of the most critical issues facing this country, whether it's foreign policy, or whether it's relations with India, relations with the United States, China. We have got to be on the same page. And this same page is a word that should be banned. I think it's overused. And we keep talking about the same page on this and same page. That's all nonsense. We have to be very clear. We have very difficult, complex, strategic issues facing this country. And I do not see the seriousness in either the National Assembly or the Senate or in the government. Please don't mind my saying, I know it might be clipped by a PTV or whatever it is.
No, it's a very pertinent thing, and it will not be clipped. And as a matter of fact,
So
I would like to, Mr. Ambassador, I would like to actually expand on this, because you just raised something very important, and I think we're going to go for a quick break, and we'll come back. And Ambassador Khokhar, we would like to actually expand on what you said.
And reflect more on it.
Yes, and Zunaira, how much Pakistani domestic politics and situation impacts our ability to conduct diplomacy in Kashmir externally?
Yeah, and I would like to the other side, to reflect on the other side as well. Despite all the domestic challenges, I think we have done wonders.
At least we have
stirred, we have created that ripple effect.
Let's talk about this, Zunaira, after this break.
After a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back to this great debate again, and we are talking about what's happening in Kashmir ever since the Article 370 has been abrogated. And before break, we were talking about the diplomacy, how the Pakistani diplomacy is working or not working, and Ambassador Khokhar had made some comments. Ambassador Durrani, what is your take on what just has been said by Ambassador Khokhar? In my opinion, we were quite quiet for a long period of time before this government, and I think we have done quite well. Well, it's not enough. I wouldn't say it's enough, but we have done quite well. And is there anything more that we can do?
Well, I would say we would have done quite well, much better, had there been a result. We did try thrice through China in the UN Security Council, but except for the informals inside the closed doors of the UN Security Council, it didn't move much because we had the veto from the French, because they were selling their Rafale aircraft to India worth $7 billion. The United States had a newfound love with India, so they were lukewarm. They didn't say, because once one permanent member says no, it means a veto. So the rest kept quiet, including Britain, including United States. Russians would have been on board had this been debated, and they would have sided with China, or perhaps kept themselves neutral. But unfortunately, this did not happen. So I think we should be realistic enough, and then it calls for more work. On the diplomatic front, yes, if we had this been debated and negotiated in the UN or elsewhere, then yes, our diplomacy would have shown its, worth. Diplomacy has not got a full chance. The reason being, as my senior Ambassador Khokhar has rightly said it, whatever it is, your foreign policy is a reflection of your domestic structure. If the people in the country, politically they are divided, they are, singing different tunes and different songs. So we have to face that music. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, I will have to disappoint that our success in diplomacy, if you compare it with the Indians have been pragmatic. They have taken an action. They are aggressors, but the world has not taken the due notice which it should have taken, despite all our protestations and despite all our efforts. So what do we say? That we have failed? No, we have not failed. I'm not saying that. It is an ongoing and persistent process, which we will have to, and we will have to, I think we will not give up. It is 70 years. China waited for Hong Kong for 150 years. For Macau, it waited almost for 400 years. We have to have the patience of the Taliban. They told to the Americans that you may have the watches, but we have time. So I think we have the time. We will, I think, keep on hammering this point. And for India, I don't think they have much options. They have only 3 options. 1, kill all the Kashmiris. 2nd, make them good Indians. Or 3rd is to negotiate. So it is India's pick. Whatever they want to do, they will have to do that. So diplomatic options are also like that, these three options which I have told you. So they have tried to have a complete lockdown, they have failed. They have failed in a sense in subjugating the will of the people. So as long as the Kashmiri people have the will, they will continue. So that's why during the past
Kashmiris,
7
Ambassador
decades,
Durrani, have the will. There's no doubt about this. But very quickly, just a quick follow-up before I move to Mr. Oborne. Ambassador Durrani, I infer from what you said, and you said several very important things, but a couple of things I want to highlight. One, you said about the internal Pakistani politics. Somehow, it seemed to me you're saying that Pakistani governments need to focus on uniting the country in order for us to have a stronger foreign policy. And a second thing you mentioned, the Indians, one edge the Indians had over Pakistani diplomacy is that Indian diplomacy has been sort of pragmatic. So just on the point of being pragmatic, what exactly are you saying? I mean, are we not pragmatic?
No, they pragmatic in a sense that they wanted to have it, they have just bulldozed everything. Pragmatic in a sense, because they knew it, their worth, they have seen there, they have weighed their economic muscle, which is why now they could get away with whatever they wanted to do. We have had all the moral, diplomatic, political weight with us, and the arguments were in support of us, but the world did not listen to that. That's why I said what happened in the UN Security Council. Yes.
Great. Ambassador Durrani, if I just have a very quick question for Mr. Oborne.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Mr. Oborne, I just wanted to ask you a question. Since you're a very good, I would say you've studied this region quite well, both Pakistan and India, and I'd like to just ask you this question. I think 3 years ago, New York Times commented on Indian Army's use of pellet guns in Indian-occupied Kashmir. And this term really does not escape my mind. I keep recalling it often. New York Times, in one of its editorials, described the victims of the use of Indian pellet guns in Kashmir as the victims of a pandemic of dead eyes, since there was a large number of casualties, people blinded because of the use of these pellet guns. For India to resort to this kind of brutality against a minority of people, considering, of course, the population of India, Kashmiris are a minority, subjugated, occupied. For India to do this without having a prior colonial history and with its own history of a freedom movement, a liberation movement against a colonial power. For Indians to do this, I mean, how do you reconcile this conflict within the Indian personality and psyche? On the one hand,
while they claim to be the largest democracy.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a key point.
It's a very profound question, because when India was founded, it looked like a great democracy, a great pluralistic democracy. Gandhi, Nehru, and it was about tolerance. And for a long time, Pakistan looked to be the opposite. You had you had a series of military dictators, and as we know, we had a record of sectarian attacks on minorities, and I've been wondering about this. Maybe things have turned around since Imran Khan became leader. He's opened doors to minorities. He's made a number. He's not been perfect by any means, but there have been big statements about Sikhs and Hindus from the Prime Minister. And whereas India has gone in the opposite direction, under Modi, it's taken a terribly dark direction. I mean, Kashmir is the only, I think I'm right in saying, the only Muslim majority state inside India. And you've got to look at Mr. Modi's record in Gujarat, where he
Absolutely.
He's accused of sanctioning really the most awful bloodshed against Muslims. And to me, Mr. Modi looks like a renunciation of the magnificent moral inheritance of Gandhi/Nehru. And Pakistan, to me, looks a happier. I mean, there are all kinds of problems in Pakistan, but I think there are hopeful signs that it's showing a wisdom and a kindness towards minorities, which hasn't always, by no means, has always been the case.
So that settler colonialism mindset, I will get back to that, Lord Qurban. It's like exact replica of what is happening in Palestine that is happening in Kashmir. The domicile law, like ripping their citizenship off is one thing, and then bringing people in of a different religion and changing the demograph, that's an altogether different thing. And it is happening under the watch of like P5, like the big five of UN and European Union Commission. And we have Amnesty International. We have so many reports on what the Ahmed referred to, the pellet guns, use of pellet guns. Still no move. How does the Kashmiri community in England feel about it?
Lord Qurban.
Lord Qurban.
Yeah. Well, the good British citizens, including the Muslim minority in UK, they have raised their voices. Right across UK, people have, raised their voices, but at the same time, I have to say that British media, has not really picked it up. This is the sad side of
They've been selective.
Things. It has been very selective.
Okay.
And if you look at the Citizen Amendment Act in India, and what is actually going to happen with a lot of people who are, the Registration Act as well. If you put them both together, first of all, they're going to find out who can prove to be Indian. And if you're not Muslim, then you are a classless person. If you are, if you are Muslim, you're a classless person. If you're not a Muslim, then you can be given an Indian citizenship. And for which there are already well-documented, evidence to say that they are building concentration camps in Sikkim and Assam, and there is already preparation going on. And the fear is, and I have to say that this was raised, only about 10-12 days ago in the House of Lords, and many of the speakers on that issue thought that this is perhaps going to be another Rohingya type of situation whereby a large number of people are going to be classified as non-nationals or aliens, and they will become homeless, and therefore there's a big fear, and under the Modi's watch, as it's been said already, that he's Islamic phobic kind of policies that he's adopting. It is very fearful, and many people are raising concerns quite rightly.
Although on the British media, Zunaira and Lord Qurban, I would say I'm very impressed by some of the journalism of our British colleagues who've done really good exposés on Kashmir, including even in BBC, because I do remember 5 years ago, you couldn't find really a piece on BBC.com, for example, that would explore human rights situation either inside India or what the Indian Army is doing in Indian-occupied Kashmir. You do that now, you find that. But just to follow up very quickly, you were part of a very, very important discussion or debate in the British Parliament on the situation inside Indian-controlled Kashmir or Indian-occupied Kashmir. And everybody from all the political parties in the UK participated in this discussion. That was amazing. It's available online. People should really go and watch it. It was amazing debate, insightful. What's your take from that? Because I found a newfound interest really in the British politicians on Kashmir.
Or maybe it's just a flip side, because you have taken such a disastrous step that those who did not know about what's happening in Indian-occupied Kashmir now know.
Yeah. Well, as it happens, I am maybe the only Kashmiri origin members of the House of Lords now. And therefore, for me, I find, I believe that it is my my duty. If nobody else is going to speak up, at least I should speak up. And when I do speak up, there are other people I find who will be, very concerned about the human rights and the democracy and so forth.
So you do feel there's an increasing acceptability for this narrative on Kashmir?
I'm finding that,
yeah.
but at the same time, I have to say that one disappointing factor is that although I might find many sympathizers when I do raise the issue, in my 10 years of membership of the House of Lords, none of the others have done it, except Lord Ahmed, who is no longer a member of the House of Lords now. No other members have ever raised the issue. They may support me or Lord Ahmed in the past, but raising the issue of Kashmir, nobody else, no other lord is doing so.
I think this takes us to what Ambassador Khokhar said. I think the onus, the responsibility also falls on the British Pakistani and British Kashmiri communities as well in terms of being organized.
Well, but certainly, because I am a Kashmiri origin, I have friends and relatives living on both sides of line and control. Yeah. So I'm directly affected person. Yeah. And therefore,
they're
I will have more information.
From each other.
The other may pick up from the media and their own sources, but I have direct information sources within Azhar Kashmir and also in the Indian Health Kashmir, and I get information updated very regularly. Therefore, I am the first one to know if things are happening, what things are happening on the ground. Therefore, I raised those. But at the same time, I am saying that there is more awareness now in the members, and I'm finding more and more people.
You're doing your PhD in London, I think.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
The Defence Academy, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm sure you interact with the British foreign policy community, the national security community. What's your take? I mean, you've just recently been, from London.
Well, Ahmed, they're very tight-lipped about it. They are not that open about it, and what they say is not what they mean, because maybe they don't find it very appropriate to discuss it openly. But what I've found very profoundly in the mindset of British democracy is that they always have their interests first, one way or the other. Like, for example, I have seen massive people in the streets of London when there was Iraq war going on. They did not change anything. That did not change anything. When there was an Afghanistan invasion happening and there were people all across the London about that, nothing happened. So the democracy and bureaucracy are on the same page, and people are just having their own conscience. I would say it is that way. So is it, Ambassador Khokhar, am I correct that governments have their own agendas? It is not being run by the sentiments and the emotions of the people, although the democratic architect of this Westminster model, they say it's about the people. But when it comes to agendas, it's not about the people.
You see, it's basically about your national interests. What are the national interests of Britain? The key main interest is to keep an excellent relationship going with India, have excellent trade with them, sell their wares. India as a country is buying arms from all over the world, including Britain, if they want to. So it's really their interest is to sell, I don't think we should really overemphasize this aspect. I mean, they do as much as their interests permit. In all fairness, I have seen very good editorials, very good articles in the British newspapers, in the US newspapers, or in fact other places also. But then, their focus changes very quickly. I mean, Kashmir is not on their radar screen for 24 hours a day. It's not. It cannot be. There are other issues around the world.
That's a reality.
And that's a reality. So when there is something which is newsworthy, I mean, let's say, last night, yesterday, there was a big explosion in Kabul. Heard big news. It was on CNN, BBC, everywhere. So what I'm saying is that I think we should not be blaming. I want to ask you, Ahmed, how many serious debates have we had we have had in our parliament.
I love that. I love that point, Ambassador Khokhar. We have not had a single hearing on Kashmir in Pakistani parliament in the last 2 years. While you had those hearings in the US Congress, you had them in the European Parliament, you had them in the British Parliament. And Ambassador Khokhar, we're almost out of time. So very quickly, my two guests, Ambassador Durrani and Mr. Oborne, what's both of you, your take on this? I begin with Ambassador Durrani.
Sorry, come again regarding
Ambassador Durrani. Yeah, the fact that what have we in Pakistan, our own diplomacy, has been effective in projecting our stance on Kashmir internationally. Very quickly, and the same question and same assessment really from Mr. Oborne.
Well, my short answer is that Ambassador Khokhar has said it, and I fully agree that we had no debate whatsoever in our parliament so far, and you have endorsed it. Problem is how we are going to deal with this whole problem. In fact, only except for this job has been left only to the government. In fact, government should include the opposition and whole nation on this vital issue, because it is the jugular vein for Pakistan, as Qaeda said. So I think how we are dealing with this jugular vein, which has been cut by the Indians, so we have to, in fact, formulate our responses accordingly. Yes.
Mr. Oborne.
Your question is, how should Pakistan handle this diplomatically? Is that right?
Yeah.
Correct.
Well, I have no idea. I think on this issue, you have rights on your side.
I think you've written on Pakistani cricket. You need to guide us on that as well. So it is again time for a short break. Stay with us.
So welcome back, and Zunaira, I think we have now the Federal Minister for Information and Broadcasting of the Federal Government of Pakistan, Minister Fawad Chaudhry Sahab. Thank you very much for joining us. I know you took time out from a very, very busy schedule today, so I'm really very grateful.
Pleasure is all mine.
And I would have loved to ask you the first question, but I'm going to pass the baton on to Zunaira.
Yeah, so Mr. Minister, I'll be the devil's advocate here. Because before you, we were discussing the whole issue of this abrogation of Article 370 by the brute force of India. And the ambassadors thought that we have not been very proactive. For example, in order to fight the cause for Kashmir in a successful way, we need to unite our own house first. And for instance, he said that there has not been a single debate in our parliament on the issue of Kashmir in the 2 years. How do you look at that?
Well, I think Ambassador has not actually followed Pakistani parliament. There have been a series of debates on Kashmir. There have been at least 3 joint resolutions. Actually, all parties, despite, in Pakistan, we have a very loud democracy. We have huge differences with each other. But when it comes to Kashmir, actually, all parties got together and we passed actually more than 3 resolutions in joint parliamentary debates. And there was a series of debates in the parliament. So I think the minister has not followed the ambassador has not followed Pakistani parliament.
What about your government, Mr. Minister? Let me ask you about your government. How do you assess the response of your government to the crisis which was created by India, in all honesty? It's a crisis that none of us here really asked for. The Indian government created this crisis on 5 August 2019. So we found ourselves in the eye of the storm. How was the response of your government? How do you assess that? How do you measure it?
Actually, Ahmed, it was something extraordinary. Why? The reason is that since Second World War, there's not a single annexation of, there is not a single example of annexation in the world. India has actually tried to subvert the whole, I would say, the tradition that is now firmly grounded in international law, that you don't annex territories. What India tried to do on 5th August was actually something no government in the sane mind would have done. And unfortunately, there was a government who has no sense of international responsibility. They are not right-wingers, they are extremists. I mean, RSS philosophy is very close to Nazis. And as the Prime Minister Imran Khan has actually, defined and referred to this ideology of Nazis and to the ideology of RSS in the present Indian government in more than one speeches, they are very close to Hitler in their demeanor, in their attitude, in their actions. And it's only after Hitler, who annexed in the Second World War, they annexed Austria to Germany, this happened for the first time. So, frankly, the whole world was actually stunned on the action of Prime Minister Modi. And the reaction after that, after the 5th August, within India and outside India, obviously reflects this, I would say, the magnitude of the attempt that Prime Minister Modi did in India by annexation of Kashmir, which is obviously not possible. And in my view, they can do more. Actually, they can try to convince the world. They can try to convince, the political parties within India. But just forget about the outside world. Even the political parties in India are not convinced on their on this action of Prime Minister Modi. Congress is on record, actually opposing this move. All Kashmiri leadership, forget about the leadership that is pro-Pakistan, all the Kashmiri leadership that historically actually sided with India is now up in the arms. So this action
and
has
I just want to point out, I love the way, Mr. Minister, I love the way you described how India disturbed the international system by this annexation, which
international order,
I love that.
The peace and stability. Mr. Minister, we have been discussing that there have been examples like East Timor. Before we were discussing that, and we got the answer that we were expecting, that yes, when it comes to Christian communities, there has been action at international level, and there is an international order that stands with those oppressed people. But when it comes to Kashmir, demographic changes are constantly happening. A lot of things we do not know. What about pandemic? How they are getting the health care? How they are getting the right to move or the right to say, or the expression of freedom and all that? How do you think this world has transformed so negatively that only the economic interests of all the countries matter? And do you see the light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to the oppressed people of Kashmiris?
Well, frankly, economic interests do matter. And as President Clinton said, it's all about economy is stupid. So we just cannot say that it doesn't matter. It do matter. But just look at the cost, what India is paying for this illegal occupation. If today India resolve Kashmir, what will happen in this region? India and Pakistan will become a normal neighbors. India, Pakistan and China will constitute probably one of the most important economic regions of the world.
True.
We will be able to connect ourselves with Central Asia, and from the Central Asia, we will be able to connect with the European Union. So just imagine the kind of opportunity India and this region is actually missing because of this very irresponsible and I would say illegal and oppressive policies of Indian regime. Pakistan, India, China, this region can actually be the can be the economic heartthrob of the world, which we are missing it.
Mr. Minister, I have a question follow-up here. You've put it now so eloquently, the case for a better future for all of us in this region and a coexistence. Nobody could have put it in a better way. So my follow-up question for you, Mr. Minister, is this. If that's the case, and you're the information minister also, so you're a master at I would assume, at really convincing the public opinion. How can you and your government, and we in Pakistan actually, reach out to the Indian public opinion, the voters, and maybe even the political elite, and engage them on this vision that you just presented right now? Is it possible? How can it happen when, because of political reasons, because of diplomatic reasons, we are unable to engage each other? We're waiting for first steps. We think that India should make a first step. The Indians think that we should make a first step.
We have made many first steps. Like we have been saying that we are ready to talk to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how to move forward? I mean, how can you reach out to the Indian public opinion and convince them with that vision that you presented?
No, I absolutely agree with Zunaira. Actually, we tried our best, and actually, if you just Prime Minister Imran Khan, not once, but I think at least 7 times, has given his vision about relationship with India. Imran Khan has obviously been is one of the very few Pakistani leaders who know India like back of his hand.
Yeah, that's true.
He has friends in India. He has the celebrity. He obviously enjoys celebrity status in India. So when I was once I went to India, and they said that if Imran Khan do a jalsa in Delhi, probably
wow.
the jalsa will be far bigger than he do in Pakistan.
Wow.
So Imran Khan is very, very popular in India. And what is his vision about the relationship? This is the vision that he actually that if India and Pakistan can come on terms in Kashmir, what will happen is that Pakistan and China and India, we will become actually we will be the central country in the 2 biggest markets of the world.
I just have a question, Mr. Minister. There's another thing that goes to the credit of Prime Minister Imran Khan. He is the first probably politician, not just in Pakistan, not just in this region, but also, I think, globally, who actually defined the conflict in Kashmir in terms of the following impressive comparison, which is to compare the suppression that India is doing in Kashmir
and the Palestine.
Not Palestine.
Not
Palestine. To Holocaust.
Oh wow! All right.
To compare Hindutva to Nazism,
the fascist regime,
and the best part, to compare Modi to Hitler. And I remember, Mr. Minister, when Prime Minister Imran Khan made this comparison 2 years ago, immediately after 5 August 2019, I do recall the kind of media coverage he received, and that statement of his received internationally.
Yeah.
I mean, it was everywhere. So, and I think in those very short words in comparison, Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, was able to convey in simple few words a very, very complex issue to people of the world who may not be following this whole story.
Yeah.
How do you see your government's diplomacy moving forward, Mr. Minister?
Well, you see, and this is not a metaphor. This is a big reality that what Prime Minister Modi is doing and and the way of his thinking is actually very close to Hitler. He believes that there is no international law. They believe that the extremist ideology of Hindutva is trying to impose on a very large country like India, and without realizing the consequences, without realizing that how the people will react to that, are actually very close to what Hitler tried to do in Europe. And this comparison actually fits in. It's not a metaphor, it's a reality, what Prime Minister Imran Khan has explained to the world. And I think his speech in the United Nations on Kashmir was one of the masterpieces. And the diplomacy that Pakistan followed after 5th August was unique in its kind. So for the first time after, I believe after 65 years, the Kashmir resurfaced in United Nations. The Kashmir was in the British Parliament.
Yeah.
There was a debate on Kashmir. There was a debate in European Union Parliament. So all over the world, the Kashmir actually came back into the main focus of debate. So this is the kind of diplomacy that Prime Minister Imran Khan led to revive the issue of Kashmir. I just also want to point out one thing. This is a bit fashionable, even in Pakistan, to say that what we have done to Kashmir, what we have done for Kashmir. You see, we have fought 4 wars for Kashmir.
Sure.
Yeah, you will come to my constituency, Jhelum. We don't have a village where we have not a grave of a son who has not given his life for Kashmir. We have, our economy, our foreign policy. We have everything revolves around Kashmir. This is what Pakistan has done for Kashmir, and we are ready to fight another war for Kashmir.
Yes.
There's no problem in it. We will go to any extent because Kashmiris are part of our flesh and blood.
Yes.
We take them as our own.
Yes.
So, Mr. Minister, you have the platform today. Can you give a message to the people of India, to the media internationally? Can you be the voice of Kashmiris right now?
Both to the people of India and also to the people of the world.
Well, to the people of India, I would like to reiterate, we want to be a good neighbors. Our model for India is as of United States and Canada. We want to have such good relationship with India. And let, not an extremist ideology take over this dream. The dream of, the dream of a prosperous South Asia, the dream of the dream of independence, the dream of freedom. Each and every Kashmiri has a right to live that dream. And let's not be cruel to them. Let's not be cruel to ourselves. Let's not be cruel to the billions of people of this region. And I hope that people of India will force their government to shun this extremist ideology. I hope that they will rise to the occasion. What does this United Nations resolution says? They say that let the people of Kashmir decide their fate. And the Prime Minister Imran Khan has gone to Kashmir and said, we will hold a referendum. If they want to be independent, they will be independent. So what more we can offer? This is the basic, freedom is a fundamental right of every human, and we are seeking this right for the people of Kashmir. This is the whole thing. And for the people of the world, I would like to say, India and Pakistan are 2 atomic nations. Let this conflict not to go to the extent where the world, and let's forget, if there's a war between India and Pakistan, the heat of this war will be felt in all capitals of the world. Forget about this, the war will be between 2 countries. This will be another world war. So try to play your role. This is, of utmost importance for the people of Kashmir, for the billions of people of this region, and for the economy of the world.
Right.
Great 2 messages by the Federal Minister for Information of the Government of Pakistan, Minister Fawad Chaudhry Saab. This is a great message. I hope it reaches to the right people, and I hope also that saner heads prevail in our neighboring country. Listening to the great choice of words that you chose today for this message. And I think we are supposed to let the Honourable Minister leave us now, and thanking him, of course. And I think, Zunaira, we have another
We have a Member of Parliament from UK, Naz Shah, with us. Can you hear us?
I can hear you very well.
Wow,
Hi,
thank you so much. Thank you, alaikum salam. Thank you so much for joining us. And I suppose you were listening to our conversation and debate with our Federal Minister?
I was indeed, and it was quite heartening to hear a message of unity and a message of good neighbours, albeit in the circumstances that we're talking to you in.
Let me just very quickly say.
It was good to see.
Yes, and let me just very quickly say, Zunaira, that MP, Member of Parliament, Naz Shah is not only a very, very well known and popular in her own country, in her own constituency, but she has a huge following in Pakistan. And I normally follow her on Twitter, and she has this huge following really among young men and women in Pakistan who are politically aware. And although they are not members of her constituency, but they're really very moved by her politics.
Yeah, because we really look up to people who are not in Pakistan, but they are representing Pakistan in the other parliaments. And we would like to hear it from you that when this happened, like 2 years back, India stripped off the Kashmiri people of their autonomy, whatever little autonomy they had, the Kashmiri community and Pakistani community. What was the response?
So I'm a member of Parliament for the Labour Party in Bradford West, and Bradford West has one of the largest diaspora communities and the largest Muslim communities in the UK. In fact, where some figures suggest it's over 50% in my constituency. And I'm a daughter of Kashmir myself, so I from Azhar Kashmir. So I spent my teenage years there. So it's an issue which is very close to my heart, and it's an issue which is very close to the heart of my constituents, not just in Bradford, in other places where there is a large diaspora community. The revocation of Article 370 sent not just shockwaves across India, but it also really, really disheartened people and angered people, and we were very vocal upon that revocation of Article 370 and what Modi did. And I concur with the Minister Fawad Chaudhry's words about the ideology of RSS. And during that year in 2019, obviously in 2020 we've had the issue of COVID, so people haven't been out and about as much. But in 2019, when this happened, there were many meetings in the British Parliament. There was many conversations. So I also am a member of the Labour Friends of Kashmir, which is a group which is from our party, our party of opposition under Sir Keir Starmer's leadership. And we are very clear that we are very clear that you cannot have a conversation about the Kashmiris without the Kashmiris.
Of course.
And I also recognise the inference which is made of Palestine and Kashmir.
Yes.
So there's two things here. There's one is that it's absolutely wrong what's happened, and we will continue to campaign. And I made a speech in that debate that you mentioned earlier, and I made my speech was really, really clear that when the United Nations were talking about Kashmir, it was supposed to give it its autonomy. It was supposed to hand over. It was supposed to agree by the plebiscite, and it hasn't.
We will continue the same debate after the break. Stay with us.
Yes. Welcome back to our special show on the second anniversary of India's illegal actions in Kashmir, 5 August 2019. It's 2 years later. India is isolated in the world. No country in the world is ready to acknowledge or recognize what India did, but it's a tough situation. There is pressure on India, Zunaira, for India to revoke those actions. Let's see what happens with those efforts. And I'm very, very honored to have Member of British Parliament, Ms. Naz Shah, with us. And I'm also very honored to have Dr. Afzal Khan from the British Parliament, Member of British Parliament. Dr. Khan, thank you very much also for joining us. And before you joined us, Dr. Khan, we were just having this very interesting conversation with MP Naz Shah, and I just would like to continue that before I move to Dr. Khan. Ms. Naz Shah, I think a few months ago there was a very, very interesting hearing in the British Parliament, not a hearing but a debate really, on the situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir. And it was really very heartening to see some of the British politicians making very insightful comments on what's happening really, and I was really very amused and happy also as a journalist, as a human rights activist, Zunaira also, to see that many of the British politicians were keeping up really with what's happening inside Kashmir.
Yeah, they were very vocal about it.
Yeah, you saw that. Yeah. So my question to you, MP Naz Shah, before I move to Dr. Khan, is if you could just describe to us this shift that I see in the British political discourse when it comes to Kashmir conflict. I see articles on BBC.com. I see the British media being very vocal in covering what's happening, the human rights violations in Indian-occupied Kashmir. How do you see that from your vantage point?
From my point of view, I don't see it covered as much as I'd like to see it covered. The crisis in Kashmir is an issue, like the Minister Fawad was saying earlier. This it is seen as a flashpoint. It's two nuclear-powered countries, India and Pakistan, and it's not a bilateral issue because it's an issue of human rights violations. So it is an issue that the world needs to take up. And from where I sit and what I see, I'm not convinced that it is given the credence that it needs, and it needs to be higher up on the agenda. So in the UK, it was parliamentarians, whether we have a clear link like I do to Kashmir, or whether we have a diaspora community. The diaspora community is very, very active on this issue and will remain so and continue to lobby members of parliament.
And Bisha, I think Zunaira or I will ask you about how organized the diaspora Kashmiris are. But if I could get the answer to the same question from Dr. Khan.
Yeah.
Did you see that shift is there? And as the MP Naz Shah said, obviously it's not enough, the coverage, but what's your take on it?
No, and Dr. Khan, if you just add to what Ahmed is asking you, like we know it's not enough as Naz Shah is saying, but do you think within these 2 years, whatever narrative was there before that, it has gotten better to some extent?
Well, look, my opinion on the matter is that this issue has been around for now more than 73 years. The hard facts on the ground are that actually international community are not doing anything like what they should be doing. And of course, Britain has a responsibility, and the real difficulty is not the individual MPs. Of course, there are more individual MPs sort of taking the baton now and trying to speak out. But the real issue is, what is the position of the British government?
Yes.
And once you get to that stage, then you realize not enough is being done. Only recently, last week, you had the World Situation, the report which the Foreign Office produces, which sort of sums up from their perspective what the situation is. And the truth is, they didn't even touch on Kashmir. They didn't even touch on India.
There you go.
Whilst we know there's a huge violation, never mind Kashmir, but within India itself, we had the largest demonstration of the Sikhs in the history.
Farmers' protest.
Farmers' protest, yeah.
So you see that, and that I think is where the issue is. The failure of the international community to actually do justice to this cause. We all know there's a UN resolutions are there. We know Britain is a permanent member of the UN who has a prime responsibility to make sure they maintain the peace. But time and time again, they actually fail to do the justice to this cause. And of course, Naz Shah, myself, and there are many others, we have APPG on Kashmir, which is getting stronger and stronger. We are doing our bit, but it's the government who has the moral duty and the responsibility for the world peace to do more. And they're not doing enough.
Zunaira, what about the lobbying of and the organization of the diaspora Kashmiris and diaspora Pakistanis? I think that's a key point that we need to discuss.
That is. Like, let's ask them. Well, we over here would like to know if the voices of the communities or the diaspora we are talking about, they really matter when it comes to the policies of the government. And as Dr. Khan said, that the government is totally on a different domain as compared to what the community is saying. So is it true that in the Westminster model as well, I'm talking about the model of democracy, there is a huge gap between the public opinion or what public want as compared to what the elites want? Dr. Shah.
I think. Afsal.
Dr. Shah.
Okay. They said Dr. Shah. So.
Not Dr. Shah, MP Shah.
Oh, wow.
MP Shah.
Okay, sorry.
You combine both of them.
MP Shah.
That's absolutely fine. So the issue for us is, look, it's not about a difference in opinion. The issue for us is this is a government which doesn't, it's like Afsal just said, it doesn't stand up to its moral responsibility, and it needs to. So it's not about opinion. If we were talking about public opinion, we'd have Kashmir would be free, because the public opinion from a humanitarian perspective,
point
human
of view.
rights perspective is it's very, very clear.
Okay.
From a public opinion point of view, the issue is of where the government, and we are members of the opposition, we're both shadow ministers, we're part of the front bench, but we're not in government. And when we are in government, if we are in government, then we still have the issue of how do we deal with this issue to make sure that the Kashmiris, because this is like Aftal said, it's been going on for over 70 years under different governments, and it's not a party political issue. It should not be a party political issue, because it's about human rights, it's about self-determination, and we have abdicated our responsibility, and our leadership hasn't been forthcoming on this issue, and that's where we need to be.
Well, Dr. Khan, if you could take up the question of how effective and organized is the Kashmiri diaspora in the UK, and also the Pakistani diaspora. So it's okay. I mean, we're criticizing the government. We're criticizing. We can criticize the politicians. But what about the lobbying efforts? Really, how do you see those?
But look, far as the diaspora is concerned, whether it's Kashmiris or the Pakistanis, you will see in the 5th of August, which is the second anniversary, virtually almost every major city in Britain, there will be demonstration taking place, and there will be a huge demonstration place outside the High Commission of India. So I don't think this is from lack of their effort, but the real issue is what the government is doing, and then secondly, I would say, is what the international community, the UN, the major players, instead of playing the geopolitical games, they should actually be doing justice to the human rights. And then I think responsibility will also come on Pakistan government. Is it sufficient to go and speak in the UN? Is that what's going to liberate the Kashmiri people? The truth is, more needs to be done on that front as well.
So what should the government
do? Yeah.
What should the government of Pakistan do? What's your take on
suggestion on that?
Well, my suggestion is the government of Pakistan actually needs to get on the front foot. We've seen a game-changer move being done 2 years ago by the Indian government. What has been our response? Does it match anything of the game-changer, the move they did? No, it doesn't. And let's see now. We've got a new government today being sworn into Azhar, Jammu Kashmir. The baton has been passed. Let's see how well they do as well. But what we really need to do is up our game. And what we need to do is really coordinate this effort globally. What we need to do is really use our connections as a government, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's the UN, whether it's our other friends, all of them, we need to call in those favors and ultimately get this higher up on the agenda in the UN as well. Again, I don't think enough is being done.
I'd like to hear MP Shah's.
The verdict of MP Shah on the same question.
Government of Pakistan's.
Yeah. What else can we do?
So the government of Pakistan, I'm not here to sit as judge and jury for the government of Pakistan, and my relationship with Azhar Kashmir is on record, and I am looking forward to seeing what the new regime does or doesn't do, and whether they will show the leadership and carry on. Some of the work that's happened has been really remarkable in terms of, you talked about earlier, the Prime Minister's speech at the United Nations, but clearly it hasn't shifted the dial. And that's what needs to happen. If you want to have a step change and see that step change, then it's not just about lobbying the United Nations. We have to lobby the rest of the world, and we have to bring the issue to light again, because India is doing very, very well in making it an issue, saying it's an issue for India, and it's a bilateral issue. And we need to shift that narrative. So one of the things that I've seen, and diaspora community, coming back to the question, the diaspora community is absolutely amazing at lobbying. But lobbying here to your parliamentarians, you're pushing against an open door. The real lobbying needs to happen, and we need to highlight the links to the RSS and the ideology of what's actually happening on the ground, but putting pressure on other governments to join those that are actually talking about Kashmir, because not enough countries are picking up the mantle. They're not fighting about this. So where does
But
it's not just about
I do endorse what Naz Shah is saying and what Dr. Khan is saying. I totally agree with you. And before you, we have been discussing this at large with the other panelists as well, being critical of our own government. But I don't know what else could be done when the world or international community is completely on one side because of the economic or trade reasons, as you also said this. And what do we do when we clearly see that FATF is being observed completely on one side, looking at Pakistan as a terrorist state and harboring terrorism, and on the other hand, there is this issue of uranium being sold in the streets of India, and nobody's talking about that. There was a direct question from the president of FATF, and he said it's not on our agenda yet. So how to deal with the double standards of the international community?
There have always, since democracy and since humanity has existed, we've always had double standards. They exist in every single. There are always hypocrisies. There is no government without. There is no country without its hypocrisies. The issue for us is, where do we at with Kashmir, and where is our? So the question is, this is a matter for the Foreign Ministry. And the Foreign Ministry, should it be going out? Should it be building relationships? And those are not instantaneous. These have to be long-term objectives. Things cannot happen overnight. Rome wasn't built in a day. The Kashmir issue has been happening for over 70 years. So what is the longer-term strategy? So some of them, I see the narrative of, Pakistan and India being good neighbours, being friends, and that's very welcome. And I see that, I encourage, India is a very, very important country. It's one of the largest democracies, and it's absolutely right that India and Pakistan be good neighbours, and we support. Because it's healthy. It's healthy. You can't have inequality in one place and the rest of the countries and rest of the world benefit from that.
Yeah. It takes two to tango. It takes two. It's just solely not our responsibility. India has to come one step forward as well. Dr. Khan, same question. What is your take on this?
Well, my take on it is, look, we've got to expose this double standards that we are talking about. But furthermore, it's about using our connections and really putting the gear up. That, I think, what is key. We do have connections. Look, the game is changing. There is a geopolitical game going on, and why some people are also ignoring what's happening in the Kashmir. But on top of that, there is the economic interest as well. But then you also have a situation where you have Pakistan, you have China, you have India. All three are nuclear powers. And that is why the world experts are actually talking about flashpoint. It's a nuclear flashpoint. So those things can also be used. And you can also see some of the changes that are happening in the UN, some of the people who are becoming members within there of different committees. So pushing those things, make sure the UN have an access. If not, they need to call out. Because at the moment, you have a situation when the UN is actually monitoring the line of control. They know exactly who is violating it, and yet they keep their mouth shut. They don't even tell the world who exactly is doing the violation. So those things, I think, is certainly we can push and expose India, because I think at the heart of this,
it's right. Like what's happening at LOC, the world should know.
I have a question here for both of you very quickly. Yes, and I have a very quick question here. Can the British Parliament have a role in nudging the British government's policy on the record of human rights of the Indian Army in Kashmir, which is very, very well documented, where
thoroughly
at the UN, the Human Rights Council, both in 2018 and 2019, I think in June 2018 and July 2019, released two reports which very well documented some very disturbing cases. So do you think it's feasible to talk about both the British Parliament, and I'm also referring, I know you're no longer part of the European Union, but But as I'm referring to Europe.
As a regional player.
Yeah, as a regional case.
Yeah.
I'm referring to Europe. Is it possible to sort of marshal support for more accountability for India as far as human rights is concerned in Britain and in Europe?
Look, I think we can. I think at the heart of it, we have a very strong case. And that is a uniformity in this idea of human rights and the respect for human rights. I think we also have a new government in America. The Biden administration has made it clear, that they won't remain silent if there are human rights abuses, particularly the vice president. She is on record saying that if need be, Kashmiri people must not feel they're alone. The world is with them. Again, there are other things which are available there as well. I think EU itself is a major player. EU has Germany, EU has France, who also has a permanent member position in UN. Now, they also champion human rights as well. And our government, which is Britain, has a double responsibility. One is that they were part of the whole problem. They left this mess, so they have a moral duty. And on top of that, they have this permanent membership in the UN as a responsibility. And on top of that, the third point I would make is there are millions of people who are connected to India, to Pakistan, and from Kashmir, who actually live in Britain, who are directly connected with what is happening there. And therefore, the British government actually should have the moral courage to call out whenever there's a human rights abuses taking place, wherever. And that, of course, includes Kashmir. And there's ample evidence. You mentioned 2 of the UN's reports where they've highlighted this.
And Bisha, do you see the beating that Indian government policy received in terms of human rights from the international media, and as Dr. Khan just referred to, some of the foreign pressures as well, for example, possibly from the Biden administration? We hear and we've read reports also about the fact that India is facing I wouldn't say demands, but certainly advice from some Western partners to normalize.
Some heat.
Yeah, some heat. Yeah, to revoke the actions in Kashmir. Do you feel that there's an impact on the Modi government? I mean, we see him less and less in public now in recent months. It seems that he's more introspective right now, although it's not really very public. They're not taking any remedial action so far. But it seems that the Indian government is feeling the heat, as Zunaira rightly used the right word. Do you share this feeling, this assessment?
I'm not sure I do. And the reason I don't is because India has just had a horrendous crisis with COVID and the amount of people that they have lost. So is it because of Kashmir? And because
could be that.
I'm not convinced. Yeah, I'm not convinced. I think it would be wrong of us to assume, and because we can't be complacent about the issue of Kashmir, because it's over 70-year-old issue. If the Biden administration was, we've heard this before, haven't we, where India feels the heat, where there's been a new regime change, the new regime has mentioned X, Y, and Z, and does that stop? But actually, if you look at the trajectory of India has been quite the opposite. Even the revocation of Article 370 and what continues to happen, there hasn't been a withdrawal of any troops. If anything, India is firming down.
More of a lip service.
Yeah. It's absolutely doubling down on that. So I'm not convinced. So which is where it comes back to the point of we need to be using our relationships to turn that heat up. And that's what we need to be doing, because clearly the heat isn't enough, and it never has been enough, because we would have never had the revocation of Article 370 had the heat been anywhere near what it needs to be.
Rightly said. Now, both of you, I would like to have your final comments on this situation where we have this hypocritical world looking at the entire situation but not doing anything practical. And then we have Kashmiri people who have this double lockdown, one because of the pandemic and the other because of what India has done to them. What is the way forward?
Well, look, I think number one is we need to show solidarity with the Kashmiri people. They must get a very clear message that the world actually is looking towards them and looking at their suffering, and they will not stand by. That, I think, is a moral sort of a positioning that we need to do. And secondly is we need to make sure the institutions which are there, which are multilateral institutions, including the UN, they must understand their role. And that role is to speak up against the voiceless, for the voiceless people like Kashmiris, so that we can have. Otherwise, what you're left with is law of the jungle, that whoever is might can actually press through whatever violations they want. And thirdly is we need to strengthen these coordination within members, different states, so that, you know, we have this common understanding. And then this fourth point I would say is to link up between the trade and human rights. This is done very nicely by the EU. They actually link this up. And I think we need to be pushing our government here in Britain that they also respect human rights, and the trade shouldn't trump the human rights. That, I think, would also go some way. And finally, I think, look, there is a bottom line ultimately of any occupation throughout the history of humanity has been single point. And that point is when the occupier knows that it cannot carry on, the cost is too expensive. Yeah. You've got to take the game to that place. And whatever Pakistan then needs to do, whatever Kashmiris need to do, they must do that.
Very important point. Naz Shah, whatever Dr. Afzal has said, it's true that it is the most militarized zone, and the kind of defense spending that India is doing to occupy that area. Do you think that, coupled with pandemic, the crisis might cripple Indian economy to some extent, and that might build some pressure on India?
I think that is the absolute the bottom line is about what the profit and loss of the you know, in a business we say with people say it's profit and loss. That is the bottom line, and until it doesn't feel the economic hit of its actions, then you're not going to see the government make a difference. You're not going to see the government rowing back, or you're not going to see those freedoms given to those Kashmiris. So the world has a part to play. The world has a part to play. The institutions have a part to play, but people have a part to play. Now, I absolutely concur with the idea of solidarity. You know, as a daughter of Kashmir, my solidarity remains with the Kashmiris. And my message to the Kashmiris is that, you know, you are not forgotten, you are not alone. We will stand by you. We will continue to raise your plight. We will continue to do that, not just here in British Parliament, but across wherever we can get our voices out. And we will support that conversation. And it is about continuing to lobby. I know that we're in recess over summer in Parliament, but I also know that we are hoping to get another debate on the issue of Kashmir and highlighting that trade. You know, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the UK, as far as I'm concerned, did put trade before people when we had the red list and the Delta variant, and not so. It was only recently that we had 9 out of 10 cases were the Delta variant. So that, you know, that has had a crippling effect on for us as Brits. So do I have the confidence that, you know, this government will do so when it comes to the humanitarian crisis in Kashmir? Unfortunately, the record speaks for itself. But yes, solidarity is there, absolutely there. And I wish, you know, thank you for inviting us here today and allowing us to talk to you and your guests and your viewers. It's always an opportunity for us to share and reaffirm that solidarity with the people of Kashmir.
And we thank both of our distinguished British politicians and parliamentarians, MP Naz Shah and Dr. Afzal Khan, for your time. And that's all the time we have for this show, Zunaira. And I think we should conclude. If you have something to add, would you?
Well, it was really touching when Naz Shah said that. I just want to tell Kashmiri people that you are not forgotten, you're not alone. And that was the whole purpose of us sitting here today and talking about your issues at length, including criticizing our own governments and criticizing our own steps that should have been taken, and we are still planning for those.
And I would just conclude here also by saying, Zunaira, the fact that no country in the world was able to defeat the call for freedom. Freedom is not defeatable. So it should
and
be
it
very,
is your
very,
will.
Exactly.
It's your will that will sustain.
Exactly.
And eventually it would.
And we will
have
see.
to.
And we will see a free Kashmir.
We will.
And let's not forget, despite all of the skepticism that we often feel when we discuss policy, when we
Yes.
discuss Kashmir, let's not forget that for 72 years, and certainly in these 2 years, India has not been able to wipe out the story of Kashmir from global headlines.
Rather, that whole pile of generations that had never heard of the place Kashmir
Exactly.
now knows what is happening.
Exactly.
So you are even more popular. You are even,
Exactly.
even more in the limelight, whether somebody agrees to it or not. That's the
Definitely.
truth.
Kashmir's story is here to stay. Kashmir is topping right now the global agenda. Kashmir is being discussed in important global parliaments and is being discussed on the pages of important news outlets worldwide. So keep the flame burning. We will continue to cover this story,
We will.
Zunaira.
We will.
And thank you very much for being with us in this special show.
Thank you.